Top 20 Production Manager Interview Questions and Answers. Every employer desires to hire an individual who will help the company attain a competitive edge in the target market. Considering the requirements of the production management role, it is vital to hire the best and right person for this job. One great way to identify the right candidate is to know the questions to ask during an interview and the best answers for the same. The good news is we have researched for you. Here are the top 20 production manager interview questions and answers. 1. What are the roles of a production manager? The interviewer wants to know whether you understand the duties performed by a production manager. Tip number 1. State several roles that are performed by production managers. Tip number 2. Demonstrate that you are well aware of your roles as a production manager. Sample answer. The production manager works with the production team to plan and schedule production activities. He or she supervises the team to execute projects as planned, on time, and within the set budget. Production managers monitor activities and make appropriate adjustments to schedules for on-time delivery. They determine the manpower, material, and equipment requirements for projects. Besides, they come up with production guidelines and programs to support organizational objectives. 2. What are the qualities of a good production manager? The interviewer seeks to know whether you understand the qualities that make production managers successful. Tip number 1. State several qualities that production managers should possess. Tip number 2. Support your answer by explaining them briefly. Sample answer. Excellent communication skills are key as a significant part of this role involves providing first-hand knowledge concerning projects and directing the production team. A sound understanding of manufacturing and industry standards is vital to enable a production manager to implement measures that make sure production standards are met. Another important quality is knowledge about health and safety procedures to have a safe and compliant production facility. Other qualities include good organizational skills and effective planning and leadership skills. 3. As a production manager, what motivates you? The interviewer seeks to gain some insight into your character and your positive attributes. Tip number 1. Highlight a positive attribute. Tip number 2. Avoid giving a generic or vague response. Sample answer. I have always been motivated by the challenge of meeting tough deadlines. During my last role, I attained a 100% success rate regarding the delivery of a product within budget and on time. 4. How would your colleagues describe you? Your coworkers know certain qualities about you, and that is what the interviewer wants to know. Tip number 1. State how your coworkers would describe you. Tip number 2. Make your answer direct and brief. Sample answer. My colleagues say that I am a person who can be counted on. They say that I am a good communicator, a team player, and that they enjoy working with me. 5. As a production manager, what viewpoint do you hold about management? Here, the interviewer wants to assess how you would handle different management aspects if you are hired. Tip number 1. Describe your viewpoint of management. Tip number 2. Demonstrate that you have a good understanding of management. Sample answer. My perspective is that teams should have experts or the most skilled individuals to perform certain tasks. So I ensure that workload is distributed evenly to make sure that individuals handle those tasks that they can do best. This is realized by making sure that every team member has the skills and resources required to effectively perform the assigned task. 6. If a team member is performing his or her job inefficiently, what do you do? The interviewer seeks to know how you would ensure a member of your team are performing optimally. Tip number 1. Demonstrate how you would handle an underperforming subordinate. Tip number 2. Give the impression that you can effectively lead a team. Sample answer. I will find out why the employee is underperforming, whether it is the inadequacy of relevant skills, work overload, or other reasons. Following this, I will advise and support the employee on ways to overcome his or her challenges and monitor the progress until the expected performance is attained. 7. As a production manager, where do you see yourself in 5 years? The interviewer seeks to know what you intend to achieve in 5 years. Tip number 1. Describe your objectives for the next 5 years. Tip number 2. Demonstrate that you will have made significant progress in your career. Sample answer. I will have a better understanding of production management. I would like to be a leader my coworkers and team members can rely on for advice, support, and direction. Besides, I intend to be experienced and skilled enough to effectively handle every responsibility that comes my way. 8. What is your daily routine as a production manager? The interviewer wants to assess whether you understand the responsibilities of a production manager. Tip number 1. State the duties performed by a production manager daily. Tip number 2. Go straight to the point without mulling. Sample answer. On a typical day, I would plan and organize production schedules, assess resource and project requirements, estimate, negotiate, and agree on timescales as well as budgets with clients and other managers. Besides, I would oversee production processes, ensure safety rules are maintained, and supervise project work among other duties. 9. How can you handle a dispute between your team members? Your ability to resolve disputes among your team member is what the interviewer wants to test here. Tip number 1. Show your ability to resolve a dispute. Tip number 2. Demonstrate the way you would help to solve the problem. Sample answer. When two of my team members quarrel, I would get both parties to determine the cause of the problem. Once that is determined, I would help them to settle the issues to make sure it doesn't reoccur. Besides, I would offer advice on how to avoid disputes in the future. 10. How do you determine the required budget for a specific job? Part of the production manager's job is to create and negotiate budgets. The interviewer wants to know how you determine the necessary budgets for production jobs. Tip number 1. Show your experience in managing budgets. Tip number 2. Let the interviewer understand that you can assess the expected costs. Sample answer. When I am creating a budget, I usually begin by checking similar jobs that have been undertaken in the past to know the costs that were involved. I also communicate with my team to know what they will require to perform the planned job effectively. Doing that enables me to come up with the cost and create a budget. 11. As a manager, how do you measure your success? The interviewer seeks to assess whether you can work effectively and meet the set goals and targets. Tip number 1. Describe how you evaluate your success. Tip number 2. Be brief and go straight to the point. Sample answer. I measure my success by checking the set goals and objectives against the work that I have performed. In doing so, I know what has been done and the pending work. Besides, I assess whether the end product has satisfied the requirement and expected outcomes. If that has been achieved, then I consider a project to be successful. 12. How would you keep your team motivated? Motivation can increase productivity. Thus, the interviewer seeks to know whether you can keep your team motivated. Tip number 1. Describe the way you can motivate your team. Tip number 2. Ensure to provide a satisfactory answer that is not questionable. Sample answer. I ensure to show recognition to team members who exceed the set targets. Doing so not only keeps those that have been recognized motivated but also the rest of the team, as everyone seeks to meet or exceed goals to get some recognition. 13. What major challenge did you encounter in your last assignment and how did you address it? Here, the interviewer tests whether you can handle challenging situations at work and come up with appropriate solutions. Tip number 1. Describe a major challenge that you faced in your last role. Tip number 2. Give the impression that you can effectively handle difficult situations. Sample answer. During a training session, some members of my production team didn't ask clarification for some unclear production process. Consequently, some requirements were not met. The customer was very upset with me for delivering an unsatisfactory product. However, I managed to convince the client to give us some time to correct the issue. My team sought clarification and corrected the problem and eventually delivered a satisfactory product. 14. How do you ensure quality across all production phases? The interviewer wants to test whether you can be trusted to produce products that meet the set quality standards. Tip number 1. Describe how you make sure quality is maintained throughout. Tip number 2. Give the impression that you understand the need to maintain quality. Sample answer. Before undertaking any project, I convene my team and go through the entire process of production. The aim of this is to ensure that everyone understands what should be done and the quality that should be maintained. I also make sure to involve my team in the planning process so that they understand the envisioned product right from the beginning. Besides, I monitor the production process to ensure all is well. 15. Describe a time you noticed a safety concern at work. What did you do? Here, the interviewer tests your ability to identify and address risks before they escalate. Tip number 1. Describe a safety concern that you noticed at work. Tip number 2. State the action you took. Sample answer. While some raw materials were being offloaded, I noticed a loose package. The package contained some chemicals that can damage one's skin. I immediately contacted the offloading personnel and instructed them to set aside the package and seal it tightly before lifting and taking it to the production store. 16. What have you done in the last year to improve your production management knowledge? The interviewer wants to know the personal development efforts you have undertaken in the past year. Tip number 1. Describe how you have improved your knowledge. Tip number 2. Mention improvement activity that relates to production management. Sample answer. In the past year, I have attended production management seminars organized at my workplace, and these have improved my management skills. 6 months ago, I enrolled in a Master in Production Management course to further my competence. 17. Why do you want to work in this organization? This is a common question that seeks to identify your specific reason for applying to work for the organization. Tip number 1. Give a convincing reason. Tip number 2. Let the interviewer understand that you know something about the organization. Sample answer. According to me, this is among the best organization that I desire to work for. It has a good environment and is well managed. Besides, it has had a steady growth since inception and is renowned for producing high-quality products. Thus, working here will also help me to grow in the field. 18. Why do you want to leave your current role? Your objectives for finding another job are assessed here. Tip number 1. Focus on the positive and avoid defaming your employer. Tip number 2. Make sure your answer doesn't suggest that you were expelled. Sample answer. I have learned much through my current role. I am now seeking a new challenge that will broaden my horizons and afford me new skills. I believe I'll achieve this through this job. 19. Tell us a time you experienced a failure and how you handled the situation. Everyone fails at some point. The interviewer wants to assess whether you take responsibility for your failure and what you learn. Tip number 1. Describe an instant that you experienced failure. Tip number 2. Demonstrate how you handled the situation. Sample answer. I once rushed the production of a product to make a shipping deadline, but in the process, a couple of critical steps were skipped. Luckily, the problem was noted before the installation of the product. I made sure that the issue with the product was rectified. Besides, I learned never to hurry a project again. 20. As a production manager, how do you ensure deadlines are met when managing production? The interviewer wants to know the strategies you use to handle deadlines. Tip number 1. Demonstrate your ability to meet deadlines. Tip number 2. Provide the impression that you can deliver projects on time. Sample answer. First, I assess what is required and the exact task involved in the production and plan appropriately how it will be executed. Second, I get appropriate resources that will get the job done promptly. These include equipment, materials, and people. Third, I assign specific tasks to each individual in the production team and specify the period of completing each activity. In the end, all tasks are completed on time. Conclusion: having these questions is a good starting point for getting ready for a production manager interview. Using these top interview questions and answers will help you to hire someone who will effectively perform the production management role, including planned production schedules and making sure that equipment is maintained or repaired regularly.